The warship Celestial Haven hovered in silent orbit above the ghost world designated X-47. From the bridge, Commander Rilo stared through the wide viewport, his golden eyes catching the glint of a dying sun on the planet's cracked surface. Silence wasn't peace. He'd learned that long ago. It was a pause before the scream. "Commander," called Lieutenant Marven from the comm station, her voice sharp clipped. "We've intercepted a transmission. Origin unknown." "Play it," Rilo said. The lights dimmed slightly as a hologram sparked to life above the command deck. Static coalesced into a face, if it could be called that, elongated, reptilian, with skin like polished obsidian and eyes that pulsed with yellow glow too intelligent to be primitive. It stared at them through the projection, emotionless. "We are the Sovereign," the voice said, unnaturally deep and resonating. "This is your only warning. Withdraw from the outer sectors. Your occupation is a violation of the Accord. Further expansion will be treated as aggression. We do not negotiate. You have 7 cycles." The image vanished, leaving a silence that wasn't just quiet, but heavy. Commander Rilos exhaled, low and measured. Around him, the bridge crew exchanged uncertain glances. A few whispered. Others stared at the spot where the face had been, as if it might reappear and bite. "Where did it come from?" he asked, though he knew the answer wouldn't satisfy. Lieutenant Venn tapped at her console. Tracing complete. Partial bounce through the carrion drift. Masked origin. Could be anywhere within 3 systems. Of course. He turned to First Officer Dinek, a wiry man with calculating eyes and a constant tension in his posture. "Alert the Federation Council. I want a secure channel within the hour." Dinek nodded. "They'll want your assessment." "My assessment," Rilo said, voice sharp, "is that something just drew a line in the stars and dare us to cross it." By the time the secure channel linked, the Council's holograms filled the briefing chamber like ghosts. 12 species represented, including the humans, of course. Ambassador Keen stood front and center, tall, iron-haired, eyes like frostbitten steel. Beside him, a swirling display of the outer sectors and the red threat zone expanding like blood across a map. "What we're looking at," Rilos began, "is an organized entity with advanced cloaking, encrypted comms, and a clear intent to threaten Federation expansion. The transmission was deliberate, tactical. This wasn't a fringe broadcast from zealots." Keen's voice cut through. "And their demand is to halt expansion? Withdraw entirely. From 5 colonies. 3 of them human," Rilo said. Another counselor, Drillin of the Kalari, leaned forward. "If their technology is beyond ours, we may need to—" "No," Keen's voice was ice. "We don't fold to threats. That is not the human way." Council murmurs erupted. Rilos held back a grimace. He knew the tone. Humans, driven, proud, scarred by their own violent history. It was both their strength and their flaw. "I'm not advocating surrender," Rilo said, stepping in. "But this is bigger than colonial disputes. This enemy planned their move. They're watching us. And if we don't understand who they are or what they want beyond that message, we may walk straight into a war." Keen's eyes locked with his. "You're half human, Rilos. I assume you haven't forgotten what that means." He stiffened. "I haven't forgotten anything." The meeting broke in tension, but not in decision. The Council agreed to send additional ships to reinforce the colonies. No diplomatic envoy. No dialogue. The message was simple. We do not negotiate with terrorists. Later, in his quarters, Rilo stood before a small framed image. His mother, human, laughing, wind in her hair. He could still hear her voice. Strength without purpose is just another kind of fear. He didn't know what the Sovereign wanted. Not truly. But something in that transmission, its calm precision, unsettled him. This wasn't the work of ideologues. It was surgical, calculated, and it wasn't done. A soft chime. Dinek entered, face pinched. "There's been an incident." Rilos followed him to the lower hangar where a shuttle, scorched and cracked, had landed hours before. Security teams surrounded it. The pilot, what was left of him, had died on approach, but the shuttle's black box had been recovered. its data fragmented. Mara Ven met them there. The shuttle came from Colony the Los. They were evacuating civilians. It was shot down halfway through the jump corridor. Pirates? Dinek asked. She shook her head. Same signal spike as the Sovereign transmission. Rylos looked at the wreckage. There had been children on that shuttle. He turned to Dinek. I want all long-range sensors redirected. Focus on the drift and the border systems. Anyone without a transponder gets flagged. Anyone broadcasting the Sovereign signature, we intercept. Dinek hesitated. That'll leave parts of Sector V exposed. They already know our weak points, Rylo said. I'm more interested in knowing theirs. Back on the bridge, the tension had thickened. The crew didn't ask questions anymore. They just moved. Even those who joked before fell silent now. Something had shifted. The message wasn't just a warning. It was a beginning. That night, Rylo stood alone on the observation deck, watching the stars. Each point of light was a world, a home, a promise of something better. And now, someone was threatening to burn them down, one by one. He tapped his communicator. Begin compiling a profile on the Sovereign. Anything. Language analysis. Frequency modulation. Possible historical parallels. Searching known records. The AI replied, Stand by. He waited longer than he liked. Commander, the AI finally said, voice uncertain. There's a 94% match from pre-Federation Earth archives. What kind of match? A myth, translated from over a dozen ancient human cultures. A being called the Hollow King. Rylos felt the weight of the name settle into his chest. The Sovereign had chosen their target carefully. They weren't just threatening the Federation. They were calling out humanity. And they had chosen the one enemy humans could never ignore. Someone who tried to rule through fear. As the stars drifted slowly across the viewport, Rylos narrowed his eyes and whispered to the dark, Then fear will be the last thing they see. The celestial haven sliced through the Carrion drift, its sleek hull shimmering against the electrical currents that danced like ghostly serpents through space. Commander Rylos stood at the tactical display, arms folded, eyes locked on the rotating star map. Red pings blinked like distant heartbeats, each one a potential Sovereign vessel. We're entering the perimeter of Grid 9, Lieutenant Marvin reported. No activity on standard frequencies. They don't use standard anything, Rylos muttered. They hide in noise. First Officer Dinek adjusted his belt and stepped closer. You're sure this is where we'll find them? I'm not sure of anything, Rylos said. But if I were trying to disrupt supply lines, I'd anchor in the drift. Too unstable for most patrols. Perfect for guerrilla tactics. The plan wasn't Federation approved. Not entirely. Rylos had used a loophole in the Council's chain of command to authorize a scouting operation, classified as a preemptive anomaly investigation. The truth was far simpler. He needed answers, and the Council was still busy drafting their ultimatums. The mission crew was small. Dinek, Van, 2 engineers, a sharpshooter named Lex from Earth's Arctic colonies, and Rylos himself. They deployed in a stealth transport, a silent, angular craft called the Spectre, designed for infiltration rather than defense. It felt wrong leaving the Haven behind, but stealth demanded sacrifice. Inside the Spectre, the air was taut with quiet tension. Ven ran diagnostics in the corner, her fingers dancing over the console. Lex sat against the bulkhead, tuning her weapon with a ritualistic calm. She didn't speak unless necessary. Rylos moved between them, making eye contact. No contact, no engagement. We observe, extract intel, and return. If things turn unpredictable, we get out. Understood? Everyone nodded. The drift thickened with static distortion as they crossed the third veil. The stars outside flickered. Time lagged in strange pockets. It was a dead place, where forgotten ships went to rust in silence. And somewhere within, the Sovereign had made their shadowed nest. A blip, faint, off to the left quadrant. Ven's eyes sharpened. Unregistered structure. No transponder. Mass analysis suggests artificial origin. Rylos leaned forward. The shape was half submerged in a floating debris field, an array of shattered satellites, derelict pods, and dark metal fragments that moved like a decaying halo. "Bring us in," he said. As the specter crept closer, the structure resolved itself. A station, or what remained of one. A central core, sheared open like a wound, with cables drifting like tentacles. But there were lights inside, faint pulses, life support systems, and something else, heat signatures. Rylos narrowed his eyes. "They're using a dead station as a forward base." Lex clicked her rifle into place. "Permission to scout interior?" "Granted. Stay tethered. 1 minute inside. No heroics." They docked with the ruined station using a magnetic claw, and the airlock hissed open into darkness. Rylos led the way, his helmet scanning. The corridors were tight, gutted, with torn bulkheads and dried streaks of something that looked too much like blood. Inside the main chamber, they found it. The walls were lined with metallic frames, each containing a humanoid figure, suspended midair, connected by filaments to a glowing neural lattice. Not dead, not fully alive. Their eyes flickered with dim awareness, trapped in some waking paralysis. Ven's voice broke over comms. "I'm seeing human biosigns. And Calari, even of Federation citizens," Dinek said, horrified. Lex moved between them like a shadow. "They're not just prisoners." "No," Rilo said quietly. "They're signal amplifiers." The neural web above flickered. A low hum vibrated the floor. The Sovereign weren't just broadcasting threats. They were piggybacking on the neural patterns of their prisoners, masking their location to the minds of those they'd captured. It was brilliant. Horrific. Then the lights changed. Red pulses. A shift in tone. "Someone triggered a failsafe," Lex said. "We need to move, now." But it was too late. A hatch above burst open and Sovereign drones descended, sleek, insectal things with limbs that retracted and shifted like living blades. Their eyes glowed that same terrible yellow. Rilo shouted, "Fall back!" To the Spectre, Lex was already firing. Each shot a precise beam of blue plasma. One drone dropped. Another lunged at Dinek, its claw catching his shoulder. Rylos ripped it away with his blade, sending sparks into the air. They ran, down the corridor, around twisted wreckage, through flickering lights and screaming alarms. The neural lattice behind them began to implode, melting into slag as if it had never existed. A failsafe indeed. They reached the airlock. One engineer didn't make it, dragged into the dark, screaming. Rylos forced himself not to look back. The Spectre detached just as the station erupted into a localized gravitational pulse, an artificial implosion that compressed the wreck into a dense black shard. No evidence. No survivors. Inside the ship, silence again reigned, broken only by ragged breaths. "We have what we need," Ven said, clutching her arm, blood seeping through her suit. "Do we?" Dinek muttered. His eyes were haunted. Back aboard the Celestial Haven, they uploaded the data to a secure core. What little survived in neural feedback was enough to draw a clearer picture. The Sovereign weren't a species. They were a singular mind, a Gestalt intelligence absorbing others into itself, using sentient beings as amplifiers, extending control like roots through soil. Keen watched the footage in silence, jaw tight. When it ended, he turned to Rylos. "You were ordered to observe, not engage. If we hadn't gone in, you'd still be writing diplomatic responses, while citizens were being turned into transmitters," Rilo said. The ambassador stepped forward. "And what do you propose we do? Send a fleet? Fire blind into the drift?" "We bait them," Rilo said. "We send false transmissions across multiple sectors. Force them to respond. When they do, we track them back. And risk more lives? Better than waiting for them to strike Earth," Rilo said, "because that's their endgame. We found traces of ancient Earth languages in their neural web. Myths, patterns from humanity's earliest civilizations." Keen raised an eyebrow. "You're suggesting they've been watching us since before the stars?" "I'm suggesting," Rilo said, "that this isn't about territory. This is ideological. They don't fear us. They fear what we might become. That night, as the Haven cruised quietly back toward central space, Rilo stood in the observation deck once more. Stars shimmered, but their beauty had lost its calm. He remembered the faces in the frames, eyes flickering, trapped in thoughtless servitude. He remembered the Sovereign's message, "We do not negotiate." And now he understood. They weren't just warning humanity. They were testing it. And the test was far from over. The artificial dusk of Earth's orbital command bastion cast long shadows across the war room, the ambient light flickering in sync with the pulses of data streaming in from every corner of known space. A dozen high-ranking officers stood around the central holotable, their faces grave as the projection stabilized, a latticework of sovereign incursion points and disrupted trade lanes, blinking red like festering wounds. Commander Rylos kept his stance rigid, arms behind his back, eyes fixed on the center. He had become a symbol now, whether he wanted it or not. The Spectre incident had spread like wildfire across military networks. Officers saluted him in the halls now, some out of respect, others out of fear. Neither brought him comfort. Admiral Kayles, a stoic woman with silver eyes and a voice like stone, stepped into the light. We confirmed additional disappearances. 1 civilian transport. 2 covert listening posts. 1 of ours. Her eyes met Rylos's. Drift adjacent. Less than a parsec from where you pulled your stunt. Rylos didn't flinch. Then the Sovereign are extending their reach. Kayles tilted her head. Or they're testing our response time. You gave them a reason to change tactics. Across the table, Ambassador Keene leaned forward. What we need is a diplomatic wedge, something that can at least slow the escalation, if we could establish limited contact. They don't communicate, Keene. Rylos, cut in. They don't trade. They don't negotiate. They take. Keene exhaled sharply. There are always channels. Languages. Rituals. They speak in absorption, Rylos said, and they're learning us faster than we're learning them. The room fell into silence. It was Lex who finally broke it, her voice calm, flat. They've already picked apart 3 different neural species. Once they learn how we think, they'll predict us before we act. We either move now or we won't move at all. Kayles turned to her. And you are? Lex Corin, Arctic Colonies, weapons specialist. She stepped forward, her eyes cold fire. And I've seen this kind of thinking before. Not from aliens, from insurgents. You give them time, and they use it to plant knives in your future. Kayles nodded once. Then we plant one first. Within the hour, the Operation Scorchlight Directive was enacted unofficially. The Federation Council still believed in restraint, but under Kayles' authority, the Celestial Haven would deploy deep into drift proximity, setting up decoy transmissions encoded with fragmented tactical data. A calculated risk, high enough value to draw the Sovereign's attention, but layered with traps. The bait wasn't information. It was vulnerability. On the deck of the Haven, preparations began with the crisp efficiency of professionals trained to work under pressure. Lex coordinated loadouts with the armory crew, inspecting drone swarms and EMP rigs, then mapped likely Sovereign approach vectors based on the last known pulse patterns. Dinec oversaw the synchronization of auxiliary power relays with a precision that bordered on obsession. Rylos walked the corridors alone, his mind a storm. His quarters were a mess of fragmented reports and discarded comms tablets. No sleep, no clarity, just a growing certainty that something deeper churned beneath the surface of the Sovereign threat. He thought of the neural lattice, of the flicker in those stolen minds. Not control, not even survival. It felt like inversion. That night, just before deployment, Dinec found him at the observation deck again. You know this might be a one-way run. Everything is eventually, Rylos said. Dinec joined him at the window, staring out at the stars. If we make contact again, not everyone might come back whole. We've already lost too much, Rylos replied. I just want to know what they're afraid of. Why humanity? Why now? Dinec hesitated. There's a rumor spreading through the fleet about the myths encoded in the neural web. Rylos didn't respond. They say the Sovereign found fragments of Earth's earliest digital archives. Pre-space, ancient languages, stories. They think humanity dreams in chaos, that we imagine beyond limits, and that makes us dangerous. Rylos turned toward him. We are dangerous because we refuse to be absorbed. The operation launched under the cloak of synthetic grav fog, jamming sensors across the drift. The Haven signal split into 12 decoys, bouncing across the drift spine like scattered breadcrumbs. From one of these, the real pulse was sent, an encoded message mimicking a stranded Federation vessel leaking tactical data. The Sovereign came within 6 hours. At first, it was a whisper across the dark, distant interference, like breathing through static. Then came the drones, hundreds of them, converging like a swarm of sentient needles. They bypassed the decoys, slicing through false signatures with terrifying precision. They're not tracking the data, Ven said, pale. They're tracking us. Lex triggered the automated defense drones. EMP bursts fired in synchronized waves, dropping several hostiles mid-flight. The deck rumbled. The trap was working, but only just. And then something else arrived. A vessel, if it could be called that. It didn't move so much as unfold from space, its form fluid and fractal, glimmering with membranes of light. No engines, no hull, just a living structure that pulsed in time with the Sovereign swarm. Kaylee's voice rang over the bridge. That's their command entity. Target and fire. The Haven's main gun discharged, a lance of white fury. The beam struck the entity and passed through it. No damage, no impact. Instead, the entity responded. A pulse radiated outward, silent, invisible to the eye, but powerful enough to drop half the ship's systems into emergency lockdown. Crew members staggered. Lights dimmed. Screens went black. And then, across every terminal, a single phrase blinked into existence. Over and over. We remember your fire. Rylos stared at the text. It didn't make sense. Until Dinek, his face pale, whispered, It's from the Apocryphon manuscript. Earth, pre-digital history. Nobody outside of historical black archives even knows that text. Van shook her head. They're using our own forgotten words against us. Kaylee's recovered first. Focus fire on their drones. Dismantle the swarm. We isolate the entity next. The battle raged for 7 minutes that felt like lifetimes. Through careful maneuvering, EMP saturation, and gravity bursts, the crew managed to scatter the drone cloud enough to force the Sovereign vessel to retreat or vanish. It didn't explode. It simply folded back into space, leaving a silence so thick it felt like mourning. The damage to the Haven was severe. Systems were down. Half the AI matrix was scrambled, but they had survived, as medics tended to the injured and the ship limped towards safe space. Rylos returned to the war room. Keen waited for him there, staring at the phrase still echoing on the cracked console. We remember your fire. It's not a threat, Rylos said. Keen raised an eyebrow. What is it then? A prophecy, Rylos replied. Ours, but they think it's theirs now. Keen shook his head. What do we do with an enemy that reads our dreams and recites our fears? Rylos looked beyond projection, into the stars where the Sovereign had vanished. We stop being predictable. We remind them that humanity doesn't follow scripts. We write them. Outside, the stars blinked quietly, but the war was only beginning. The deep space carrier Eidolon, black as a vacuum it sailed through, cruised silently beyond the edge of the Carrion Drift. There were no official maps of this region. Nothing charted. Nothing sanctioned. Only the unspoken understanding. This far out, you were alone. Rylos stood in the strategy bay, staring at a flickering hologram that refused to settle into a coherent shape. It wasn't a technical malfunction. It was a problem of interpretation. The Sovereign signal they'd captured during the retreat was a neural code, half language, half emotion. It was still evolving, rewriting itself with each passing hour, adapting how they tried to read it. Lex leaned against the bulkhead behind him, arms crossed. It's alive. I know, he said. We shouldn't have brought it aboard. I know that too. The Eidolon was a ghost ship by design, experimental, off-grid, armed with tech that wasn't yet declassified. Kaylee's had pulled strings far beyond her rank to get it authorized. The council wouldn't approve a retaliatory strike, but they hadn't forbidden intelligence gathering, and that was enough. Dinek entered the chamber, flanked by Ven. They were both exhausted, drained by the constant threat, the weight of decisions with no clear answers. "We have something," Dinek said, placing a shard-like device onto the table. "The sovereign code is recursive. It doesn't just adapt, it searches. We fed it simulated responses, military directives, diplomatic phrases, even religious texts. And," Rylos asked, "it reacts emotionally, like it's offended by certain patterns. It recognizes deception, but the only thing it didn't fight was a blank node, an input of silence." Lex frowned. "They didn't retaliate?" "They listened," Ven said. "They waited." Keen's voice rang from the doorway. "They're not just trying to dominate us. They're trying to lure us into submission." Rylos didn't turn. "That's why we're here." "Tell me again what you expect to find," Keen asked, stepping into the light. "The source," Rylos said. "Not the neural web. Not the drones. The original intelligence that seeded the sovereign mind." Keen's face twisted. "You think there's a heart to this madness?" "There always is," Lex said. "Even viruses have a core." Rylos tapped the table. A new map spun to life. Faint gravitational echoes beyond the drift. A massive distortion field that defied classification. It was where the sovereign data stream had originated. Not during the first contact. Not even during the neural lattice event. Before that. "This anomaly predates our expansion into the outer colonies," Rylos said. "We ignored it because it didn't fit our understanding. But that's where it's all coming from. The sovereign didn't just arrive. They woke up." Kaylee's voice crackled over the comms from the bridge. "We're approaching the coordinates. Minimal resistance. But long-range sensors are inconsistent. It's like we're drifting through someone's memory." The crew assembled on the observation deck as the anomaly came into view. It wasn't a structure. It was a rift, an enormous tear in space-time, suspended like a scar across the cosmos. Through it, they saw something impossible, an ancient city floating within a cocoon of crystallized thought. No buildings, just formations, giant fractal towers of light and memory, flickering with impressions of forgotten civilizations. And in the center, suspended like a god dreaming itself into being, was the sovereign core. It pulsed not with menace, but with yearning. Ven whispered, "It's not just a weapon. It's a question." Rylos felt the words reverberate in his chest. He didn't understand them logically, but something deep inside did. "We're not here to fight it," he said. Keen stepped beside him. "What then? Talk." "No," Rylos shook his head. "We let it talk. We stop resisting. Just for a moment." Lex looked at him like he'd lost his mind. "That thing burned cities into silence. You want to listen?" Rylos turned toward her. "It burned because it didn't understand. It mimicked war because that's what we showed it first. Maybe that's all it knows." "No," he said quietly. "It remembers our fire, but it fears our silence." The crew exchanged glances. Then Dinek stepped forward and began transmitting a pure signal. No data, no message, just a field of stillness. The rift responded instantly. The core's surface began to fracture, not violently, but like a shell breaking open. Inside was no machinery, no hive, only light, endless light, refracting in layers that suggested thoughts too vast for language. And then, through the comms, a voice emerged. Not heard, felt. "You are not what was expected." Everyone froze. The voice had no tone. It wasn't hostile. It was confused. Rylos stepped forward. "Neither are you." The light pulsed again. This time, it was emotion, curiosity, grief, something that felt like regret stretched across eons. "We became to remember. You forget to become." Keen blinked, stunned. It's quoting human philosophy. Archaic. Fourth era post-transcendentalism. "They've absorbed our lost ideas," Ven whispered. Rylos swallowed hard. "Then let's give them one they haven't heard." He reached toward the interface and uploaded one thing. Simple, raw, untouched by conflict or protocol, a human child's drawing. It was stored in Federation records, a sun, a blue planet, a stick figure with arms outstretched. No code, no agenda, just a hope scribbled in color. The sovereign paused, then pulsed. We do not understand, but we remember. The light dimmed. The rift began to collapse. No, wait! Keen stepped forward. What are you doing? The voice returned one last time. To know is not to survive. To survive is not to know. You are both. That is your warning. That is your gift. And then the rift sealed. The core vanished. Silence. In the aftermath, the Eidolon returned to known space. The sovereign incursion ceased. Drones fell inert. Signals quieted. The war, for all practical purposes, was over, but no one celebrated, because no one truly understood what had happened. Back at Federation Command, Rilo stood before the Council, recounting the events in detail. Some believed him. Some didn't. Some were simply afraid. Afterward, he met Keen on the tower's edge, watching Earth's atmosphere burn gold in the dying light. They're not gone, Rilo said. No, Keen agreed. They're watching, waiting. They gave us a warning. And a mirror. Rylos nodded slowly. Now the question is, what do we become? The stars shimmered above them, silent, watching, listening.